Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Welcome to everyone joining us for this very special live seminar featuring the Honorable Malcolm Turnbull, 29th Prime Minister of Australia. I'm your moderator today, Adil Cader. This event is being hosted by Talking Foreign Affairs, an educational initiative that seeks to empower young people to play an active role in foreign affairs and diplomacy. For the next 25 minutes, we'll be talking to Mr. Turnbull on the diplomatic opportunities and challenges he faced in office, as well as his reflections on current foreign policy issues. Mr. Turnbull was the 29th Prime Minister of Australia, serving from 2015 to 2018, having already served as Environment Minister and Communications Minister. Prior to politics, he was a lawyer, investment banker, and journalist. During his term as Prime Minister, Australia enjoyed record economic growth, passed same-sex marriage, ratified the Paris Agreement, and made emphasis on renewable energy. His government also released the landmark Foreign Policy White Paper. Since leaving politics, Mr. Turnbull has resumed his business career and regularly speaks at global conferences. Mr. Turnbull, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Adil.
So you came into power as Prime Minister in September 2015. Can you just explain to our audience the geopolitical scene back then and what was your vision for Australia's role in the world?
Well, I would say in 2015, the end of 2015, there was still considerable momentum behind free trade. The wave of protectionism that arose when, particularly when Trump was president, hadn't really taken off at that point. But you could probably say it was coming. Obviously, Brexit hadn't occurred. The Brexit vote hadn't occurred, and most people thought Remain would win when that referendum was held. The relations with China were a lot better, and there wasn't the same level of tension, but you could see, that was beginning. I would guess it would be right to say the largest national security threat at the time was perceived as being terrorism, Islamist terrorism at the time. And that was, obviously there was the fight, the wars both in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Syria, and of course, closer to home, in the Philippines and so forth. What else would I say? I think that was the sort of landscape. In terms of my vision, well, I'm a believer that Australia should have a strong and thoroughly independent voice, both in the world and in the region. We do have a very strong security alliance with the United States, and we have other allies and partners, but Australia must seek its security within Asia, not from Asia. And so it is really important that we play a very close and engaged role in the region, and that is why the first overseas visit I made was to Indonesia, and I developed a very close relationship with the Indonesian president, Joko Widodo, and as you know, we developed a free trade agreement, a strategic partnership agreement, and so forth. So but we did a lot more with ASEAN and so forth. It's a bit hard to summarize it all in a few minutes, but I think you get the picture.
So you did mention a bit how things were volatile, especially in regards to free trade. One of your most famous moments in office was that famous or infamous phone call with President Trump in regards to the refugee deal, which you actually ended up saving. Can you just explain to us how you handled that call? Because there's a lot of advice we can get from how to handle difficult negotiations, and how were you able to negotiate with Trump to then save this deal?
Well, the background to this was, as you know, we'd had quite a lot of experience with people smugglers and unauthorized arrivals, people seeking asylum, coming by boats with people smugglers, and the experience had been that the only way to stop that was to deprive the people smugglers of their product and effectively say, if you try to come here by boat, you won't get in. Okay. That had been John Howard's policy. Kevin Rudd modified that. Arrivals went up, political problems ensued. And by the time Kevin came back at the end of 2013 for his brief second term as Prime Minister, he reversed what he'd done before, and boats were intercepted and asylum seekers, were being processed both in PNG and on Nauru. We did not want to bring them to Australia for fear that would be used as a marketing opportunity by the people smugglers, and so the goal was to ensure they were resettled in another country. When Abbott was Prime Minister, efforts were made to do that in third countries without much success. And in 2016, I negotiated or agreed with Barack Obama to have a very substantial settlement of these, of these asylum seekers, subject to them meeting all the usual requirements of security and so forth, in the United States. And so that was the Obama refugee deal. That was signed in about September 2016. Trump got elected in November and became president, was actually inaugurated in January the following year. We had initially been advised that he would stick to that deal, but then, and I had a call scheduled with him, but then an hour before the call, we were advised by Vice President Pence that he was not going to, and it shouldn't be raised. So I had a pretty tough call with him. It started off with him not wanting to talk about it and absolutely saying no, there was no deal. And then by the end of the call, he had reluctantly agreed to stick with it. And I just made my case calmly and rationally. Trump was very angry, as to say the least. But I just made the point that we have a deal with the United States, and sure, the chief executive has changed, and you're free to say it was a bad deal and you wouldn't have done it yourself, but you've inherited it and you should stick with it. And to his credit, he did.
So you mentioned that your phone call on the personal, the relationship you had with Trump. How important from your experiences, you mentioned about the change from President Obama to Trump, how important is that personal connection between the head of state and head of state in the overall bilateral relationship? Well,
it's very important. The personal chemistry between leaders is critically important. Now, it's not the only factor, of course. Countries pursue their national interests. I mean, you could have an Australian Prime Minister and an American president that did not get on at all, and that actively disliked each other even. But the alliance, the relationship is just so long-standing, involves so many people, so many vested interests, so many families, businesses, strategic agendas. It will continue. That ship will continue to sail on. But you can get a lot more done when you can get on with people. I mean, ultimately, these international relations, just like personal relations, company, business relations, are determined by discussions between individuals. And so being able to get on with people and being able to persuade them, make a cogent case for whatever it is you're seeking to do, is critically important.
So you mentioned about the personal relationships and getting along with people. And one aspect of foreign policy many people aren't aware is the domestic aspect. So touching on the 2015 Paris Agreement, which was ratified earlier on in your term in office, how do you go about coordinating it? Because yes, you have the negotiation with the different other heads of state, but then there is a significant amount of negotiation within Australia, within the different state governments. How do you go balancing the different demands of the domestic stakeholders versus the foreign stakeholders?
Well, look, firstly, just a important point that most international agreements are negotiated by diplomats and officials long before the heads of government or the heads of state get together. This is not to say that, often that's the last difficult bits that need the heads of government to sort out, but most of the heavy lifting is done by others. Thankfully, because people who are running countries don't have the time to sit for days and days and weeks in negotiation rooms. In terms of getting your domestic constituencies aligned, it's very difficult. Politics is not easy, and it requires a lot of political skill, being persuasive, being conciliatory, being able to compromise. These are all. That's politics. A lot of people say of politicians, oh, it's terrible, they're compromising. Well, that's what politics is all about. Politics is all about getting deals done.
So just looking at the Foreign Relations Bill passed about 2 years ago, do you think legislation such as that to ensure there's a more unified approach by international engagement from state governments are a good thing, or do you think state governments on their own are going to be more unique in the way they go about foreign engagement?
Well, look, that was done under my successor's government. I hope that wasn't too heavy-handed. I mean, I think it was really arose out of some particular cases. Typically, states have been careful to coordinate international relations such as they are at the state level with the federal government. And, even to the extent of when a premier travels overseas, he or she will be assisted in their visit by the, Australian diplomatic, federal, and naturally Australian diplomatic mission there. So, there's a lot of, I think we need to, I hope the new Albanese government is focused more on collaboration than dictation.
So speaking of more recent times, you've been very supportive of the proposed Indigenous Voice to Parliament. I'm quite keen to get your reflections on whether this were to pass. What would that mean for Australia's reputation overseas? And when you were Prime Minister, did you speak to countries with similar histories like heads of state from Canada or New Zealand or the US about how they were able to conduct relations with their First Nations people and learning from them?
Well, answering the second part of the question first, no, I didn't have those discussions with, Canada, New Zealand, or the United States, and they've all got very different histories, right? So, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. In terms of the voice to Parliament, when I was Prime Minister, I stated on, my government's view, the cabinet's view, was that we did not think this was something that should be inserted in the Constitution. So I have, since I left office, come around to the view that I would support it. I'll certainly vote for it. But, even now I do have reservations about it because I am by nature a Republican with a small r, I hasten to add. And I believe that ideally, all of our institutions should have only, our elected institutions should only have one qualification, that is that you're an Australian citizen, an adult Australian citizen. So I do have concerns about the voice, but I think given the depth of support for it, the fact that it is, seems to be the agenda, the constitutional recognition agenda that has the widest support and from Indigenous Australians, from First Australians. I think we can live with it. We can work with it. But, it's not going to overthrow our parliamentary democracy. It is a big change, but I think for the reasons I've set out in a article I wrote recently, I'll be supporting it. As to what impact it will have internationally, look, it won't be regarded as it will be regarded as Australia, it will be regarded for what it is. It is Australia working out in its own way a sort of reconciliation or part of a reconciliation with First Australians. And, some countries, New Zealanders have got guaranteed Maori places in Parliament. Different countries have approached these issues in different ways. And I think we can learn from all of them, but ultimately what we have to do is reach agreement with First Nations people. And I think we've got to the point now where it's quite clear that the voice is what is being sought. And so on that basis, I think we would need very powerful reasons to reject it. And so while I do have reservations about it that I've outlined, very clearly, I think, I'll nonetheless be voting for it.
Just one of our submitted in questions. Alejandro asks, how do you see the future of the AUKUS partnership as a strategic security partnership with huge economic and trade benefits to follow, or just a security partnership that may harm relations between Australia's Southeast Asian neighbours, or as a balance between the two?
Well, look, it's been pretty misunderstood, I think. Firstly, it is not an alliance. It's not a mutual defence alliance at all. It's essentially an agreement to collaborate in the provision of nuclear propulsion submarine technology to Australia, right? And that is overwhelmingly what it was about. The United States provides its nuclear propulsion technology to the British, and they have done so since the 1950s. And so the proposition is that this would be done for Australia as well. In addition to that, the UK and the United States and Australia agree to collaborate and cooperate on a whole range of other, let's say, defence, signals intelligence, technology areas. That's good, but we already have a very intimate and collaborative relationship. Our ally in our region, our major ally in our region, is the United States. They're our most important alliance. The bedrock of our security is the ANZUS alliance between the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. That carries with it an expectation of mutual defence. So if one was attacked, the others would come to their aid. We don't have an arrangement of that kind with the United Kingdom, and given geography and Britain's withdrawal from this part of the world in the 1960s, I don't think we ever would. So I think it's probably been overestimated, and in terms of its consequence and substance. But I do welcome I do have reservations about, and I have public reservations about the submarine decision and the cancelling of the French contract. I think that was a mistake, quite a serious one, in fact. I absolutely welcome closer technological collaboration between Australia and the US and the UK. As to its impact on other countries, look, the only aspect of AUKUS that has caused concern in ASEAN is the move to nuclear propulsion, because there is a very real concern about nuclear proliferation. And that's particularly the case because the form of nuclear propulsion the US Navy and the Royal Navy use involves uranium, which is enriched to weapons grade. So it's actually from the US nuclear weapons stockpile. Whereas, for example, the naval reactors used by France or indeed China use low enriched uranium, which is enriched to the same level of 5-6% or thereabouts, which is used in civilian nuclear power stations.
Ties into the next question we got submitted in, who asks, do you think AUKUS significantly impacts Australia's ability to conduct independent foreign policy?
the answer is no, not AUKUS per se, but I am concerned that if we end up with a submarine fleet which is powered by, which is nuclear, has nuclear propulsion with the technology provided by the United States, in circumstances where we have no nuclear industry of our own and are therefore unable to maintain those reactors or that nuclear propulsion system in Australia, then my concern is that if we are not able to operate those submarines other than with the support of the US Navy, it is not what we have traditionally would regard as a sovereign capability. I mean, my government, and I think all governments prior to Mr. Morrison's, always regarded a sovereign capability as being one that Australia could operate, maintain and sustain itself. Now, if we're not able to do that with these submarines, and I struggle to see how we would be able to do so, given the technology that's proposed, then I think you could say that that capability is not an entirely sovereign one.
Just approaching our final question as we approach time. Just touching upon the foreign policy white paper in 2017, which was released under your government, the landmark white paper, there was an entire chapter dedicated to soft power. How were you able to leverage Australia's soft power advantage in your time in office?
Well, simply by diplomacy. It's a complex. It involves a whole lot of things. It's quite a long list. I can give you a couple of examples. International visits are very important. Conferences are very important. We had an ASEAN Australia summit in Australia during my time as Prime Minister. That was again a very effective exercise. I think we've also, we need to have a well-resourced Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and you've got to have diplomats who are outgoing, who are ambassadors in every respect, not just in a job title way, but are able to get out and tell, good stories about Australia and explain, what we're doing and what we're doing well. For example, I thought, I know this is a criticism, I guess, but I thought at the Glasgow Conference of the Parties, the climate conference in Glasgow last year, I thought it was a real pity that at the Australian Pavilion, the sort of premier exhibit was an example of carbon capture and storage being proposed by a gas company, Santos, whereas we should have been talking about, which was obviously at odds with much of what the conference was trying to achieve, whereas we could have been talking about Snowy Hydro 2.0, we could have been talking about the massive expansion of renewable energy in Australia, we could have been talking about long duration storage, so you've got to be smart, and rather than, in essence, trying to run a domestic political agenda internationally, you've got to work out and say, well, what are our strengths? What are the things that we're doing well, and what do we want the world to know more about, and that then enables you to get into a positive dialogue.
Last submitted in question was from Nicola Kostova, asking, with the Russian war in Ukraine disrupting the global energy market, do you see Australia shaping the future of clean energy within the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I wouldn't say we would shape the future of clean energy in the Indo-Pacific, but we certainly have the ability to shape it in Australia. We have the ability to become, as Roscano has said, a clean energy superpower. We have the ability to have, completely zero emission electricity and energy grid in Australia. And we also have the ability to make a great deal of green hydrogen, which can then be exported in one form or another to the rest of the region. You've also got the prospect of exporting green electricity from Australia via subsea cables. And your listeners would be familiar with the Sun Cable project So yeah, I mean, I think we can certainly play a big role. I think we can also make a big impact by demonstrating how you can economically and effectively roll out more renewables in Australia. We have the highest penetration of rooftop solar in the world, for example, and I'm very keen that our success in pumped hydro is delivered and is seen by the world as a great example.
That's it for time today. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you
Turnbull,
very
for
much.
being generous with your time. We really appreciate reflections and answering our questions, and thank you for being so generous with your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for those who joined us. Also, a big thanks to Shim for his work behind the scenes in getting this event running. This event is being live streamed on YouTube, so please feel free to share the video. Have a great rest of the day.